Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we're going to be talking about the newest album from AWOLNATION, called Here Come the Runts. You know, for as wild and messy as AWOLNATION's records have been, I'm a little bit surprised I don't think about them more often. Seriously, it's been about 3 years since I covered Run on this channel back in 2015, and I don't think I've revisited a single song since, which is kind of strange for me, because I do mostly remember that record's problems and overly broad songwriting and utterly slapdash production, and I remember the backlash that I got for pointing all that out. Hell, I probably remember that more than any individual song beyond Sail, which came in their 2011 record. But you know what? That's the funny thing about AWOLNATION. They've always seemed like a weird, misshapen hybrid of an electronic rock group that somehow struck gold when Sail almost by accident became a monster hit in 2013, a full 2 years after Megalithic Symphony came out. And yet, that song made a certain amount of sense at the time. AWOLNATION could be a band that made hits if all the disparate elements actually came together, but the cracks in their formula ran so deep and were exacerbated by their 2015 follow-up Run that it seemed incredibly unlikely that the alchemy would manage to come together once again. And yet, for some reason, their next record showed up on my schedule, and what was strange was the buzz around it. Namely that everybody was admitting that, yeah, it was messy, but this time the whiplash transitions had actually worked? Okay, it's encouraging, but I'll believe it when I hear it. But I'm also not gonna say that I wasn't morbidly curious, so alright, what did I get with Here Comes the Runts? Oh boy, this will be an interesting record to talk about, because folks, they were not kidding when they said that this record was a bit of a shift for AWOLNATION. A pivot away from the blockier, more overblown electronic rock of their previous albums to something that's a little bit more organic and actually guitar-driven, closer to the noisier side of indie rock than anything else. Frontman Aaron Bruno claims to be inspired by artists like Tom Petty and Bruce Springsteen and The Cars putting this album together, and you know, while I kinda see some of that, I'm looking more towards that direct meat and potatoes rock music, maybe The Cars coming through more, but the comparison that springs more to mind is a slightly more ragged group like early Superchunk, or other slightly more pop-leaning alternative rock bands in the mid to late 90s. They got the potent hooks for sure, but let's develop grooves or songwriting. And yet, on some level, I can't help but feel that this might not hit the soaring individual heights of previous AWOLNATION records, but it probably has the sonic palette that I like the most, and the strongest sense of actual cohesion running beneath it. And yeah, I'm saying that about an album that seems to change genres mid-track. And now that might be overstating some elements here. Again, like with every single AWOLNATION record, this album is all over the damn place. But it's hard not to see some of the whiplash shifts here. The opening title track is half-rooted in a blocky, bassy synth line you might have heard on previous records, before some well-executed shifts within the song in tempo towards a galloping main guitar riff that wouldn't be far removed from thrash metal, except with more synth horns and a slightly more liquid groove. And yet, for as much as those synths and horns, they might show up as accents on occasion on other songs, where they might have driven the songs on earlier records, the blocky, buzzy guitar riffs are immediately a lot more prominent, sometimes even getting a little bit thicker of a groove on Miracle Man, which I'll admit I liked a fair bit more when it was released last year from The Killers and called The Man. But you know what, even still, it's at least a moment where those revving guitars can really establish a consistent groove and through line, which I certainly prefer to the out of nowhere and painfully awkward rap breakdown on Sound Witness System, or the very gentle acoustic grooves on Handyman or 7 Sticks of Dynamite, although Handyman's alright, but the latter of which it finally gets going, but it's too little too late. And then, after a brief interlude, the record just dips into mid-tempo territory on Table for One and My Molasses. And yeah, I actually kind of like the latter song for the horns and the vocal harmonies. Like with the last AWOLNATION record, the multi-track vocal arrangements really are quite great, and songs where we're forced to rely on Aaron Bruno just alone in the mix, they really suffer for it. He could really use a lot of those harmonies. But you know what? It doesn't seem like any consideration was given to the album's sequencing or flow. And for the final 4 songs, it happens again. Solid, aggressive underlying riffs on Cannonball and Stop That Train, but in between all of them, we've got 2 tracks with half-assembled grooves trying to claw themselves out of a muddy mix. And for the buffoon, that's not a good thing, as that's an instrumental tune. And what's so damn frustrating is that AWOLNATION, they should probably know know better than this by now. Unlike most bands, they actually seem to have a solid grasp on tempo shifts or internal song transitions, with the exception of Stop the Train, but that song's pretty good regardless. So why this record doesn't flow better beyond a few moments doesn't seem to make a lot of sense to me. But alright, fine, we got some solid chunky riff rock and good vocal harmonies, even some decent underlying grooves, even though their bassist is no longer with the band, and AWOLNATION has proven themselves capable of writing good hooks. Hell, I'll even say that the guitars actually have some potent tone to them, but when I started digging into the actual melodies in these guitar lines, and outside of the hooks, they just seem a shade away from the necessary chord shift to really drive it home, really reach greatness there. Now granted, the heavy repetition across this album doesn't help, we'll be getting to more of that, but take a song like the hook of Miracle Man. It's got a good underlying tone to it, but it doesn't really modulate as much as it should before returning to that single bass chord, which leaves the compositions as feeling a tad undercooked overall. And once I noticed it, I couldn't stop noticing it. Handyman, 7/6 Dynamite, Tall Tall Tale, even a song like Cannonball, which has arguably one of the best hooks on the album, it just doesn't quite modulate enough in its progression to really stick with me. And I don't think I would have noticed it nearly as much if it wasn't for the lyrics. And I think I found my answer to why AWOLNATION songs just never really seem to stick with me despite some decent production or good hooks. Because there are rock songs that go broad, and then there's AWOLNATION, and their collection of half-formed manic underdog anthems where he's either spraying everything on all cylinders to propel you to the top with his love, or sliding towards utter self-loathing and then implicitly asking the audience to justify it. Hell, it's what's Cripple's Jealous Buffoon, an otherwise pretty strong hook but filled out with flimsy self-justification that doesn't exactly command a lot of nuance. Granted, even that's a degree of complexity that isn't afforded a song like Miracle Man or the title track or Cannonball or Passion or even 7/6 of Dynamite, which leaves you struggling for some sort of coherent theme or idea beyond the absolute most basic. Now, normally that's not an issue, fine, it's just hard-headed rock music, I can get pulled into that if it works well, except then you get tunes like My Molasses, which plays into self-flagellating mortification remarkably well in that sense of embarrassment, or Stop That Train, where the protagonist realizes that he's overcommitted and has to stop this relationship. Again, they're broad sentiments, but the framing is there to make it work. There is a little more complexity, even if individual details and the metaphors make less sense the more you think about them, but then you get this contrast between really basic tracks and songs that do more and actually kind of stick the landing. So look, I don't dislike this AWOLNATION record. It's playing in a sonic palette that I actually like. Even despite whiplash transitions and genre digressions, it helps that at the core there is a greater sense of groove and stronger riffs. I appreciate there's a slightly better flow here. But with all that in place, it feels really undercooked to me, with a mixed rate of success in the instrumental shifts, melodies that don't quite seem as catchy as they could be, and writing that rarely, if ever, coalesces. It really is just playing by the basics. For me, I'm giving it a light 6 out of 10, but I am recommending it if you want to hear AWOLNATION's fly off the rails again, just a little bit more foundation this time. And hey, they might not quite be the band for me just yet. I can accept that. I know this band has some pretty diehard fans, but you know what? They are going in the right direction. I'll look forward to hearing more. And as this is, not bad. Check it out. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. Again, I was hoping to like this a little more. I like some of the foundation more, but again, you go into these melodies, they just don't stick the way I want to. They could click a little better and they just don't. But if you want to buy the record, links in the description below, and I got the poll up there, so all you guys who think I'm so wrong on this, there's your opportunity to tell me. Beyond that, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. If you guys want to get involved in the scheduling process or help support this channel, link to my Patreon is right over there, where 3 times a week you guys get to vote on my schedule, and once a week for the higher tier contributors, you guys get to add albums, movies, or even a top 10 list to that schedule. More details right down there if you want to check my schedule. It's on my Instagram. But till then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.